Avoidants don't come back because you chased them, begged for clarity, or stayed available in the hope they would finally choose you. When they return, it has nothing to do with your effort and everything to do with their internal battle, the one between their fear and their feelings. And this is the truth most people never see because it isn't visible on the surface. When an avoidant pulls away, it looks like they're done. It looks like they've detached. It looks like they've emotionally checked out. But what's happening inside them is far more complex, far more chaotic, and far more revealing than their coldness suggests. Their distance isn't closure, it's temporary emotional survival. Their silence isn't the end, it's a reset their nervous system demands. Avoidants retreat because closeness triggers panic. Their mind goes into overload, their emotions overwhelm them, their sense of control slips, and the only thing they know how to do is escape. It's not about you pushing too hard, it's about them feeling too much. And when that panic rises, they need distance the way a drowning person needs air. So they pull away, not to end the connection, but to escape the feeling of being emotionally flooded. In those moments, they're not thinking about the relationship. They're thinking about relief. They're thinking about breathing again. They're thinking about shutting down the fear that feels louder than your love. But here's the part no one sees. Once the fear settles, once the emotional storm inside them calms, something else rises from beneath the noise, the connection, the longing, the memories, the feelings they couldn't access when they were overwhelmed. When the panic fades, they suddenly have space to think. They look back at what you gave, how stable you were, how patient you were, how warm the connection felt, and for the first time, the truth hits them without the filter of fear. You weren't the threat. The intimacy wasn't the danger. Their own emotional wiring was. And once that clarity arrives, they begin to miss you not from desperation, but from recognition. They feel the difference between connection and chaos, and that recognition is what brings them back. Avoidants don't return because you chased. That only overwhelms them all over again. They don't return because you waited. That keeps them emotionally stagnant. They don't return because you explained your heart. They can't hear explanations when they're triggered. They return for one reason: the internal fear that once pushed them away has finally grown quiet enough for their real feelings to surface. And those feelings pull them back to the one person who offered something they've rarely felt. Emotional safety paired with emotional depth. Your presence wasn't overwhelming. Their unhealed fear was. Your love wasn't too much. Their history was. Your closeness wasn't suffocating. Their inner child was terrified of needing someone again. And when they return, it's because that terrified part of them finally loosened its grip. Because in the silence, they realized something they could never realize during the chaos. You weren't taking their freedom. You were offering connection. You weren't pressuring them. You were showing consistency. You weren't invading their space. You were creating safety. You weren't the danger. You were the soft place they ran from because they didn't know how to receive it. The real reason avoidants come back is simple: distance calms their fear. And when the fear quiets, the truth becomes undeniable. They didn't leave because they didn't care. They left because they cared and didn't know how to handle it. And when they return, they aren't coming back for validation. They're coming back because the part of them buried under fear finally had enough space to recognize your value. They're coming back because their feelings, for once, won the battle. When an avoidant reaches out again after silence, distance, or withdrawal, their message is never just a message. It's not a casual hey. It's not random curiosity, and it's not boredom. It is the visible sign of an invisible battle they've been fighting inside themselves. A battle between their fear and their feelings. And for the first time, their feelings finally won. But to understand how powerful this moment actually is, you have to understand what happens inside an avoidant long before they type those words, long before they come back, long before they even decide to break the silence. Avoidants live in emotional extremes. When the connection starts to grow, their fear spikes. But their heart wants closeness, but their mind interprets it as danger. Their desire rises, but so does their panic. Their affection deepens, but so does their instinct to escape. So they pull away, not because they're done, but because the intensity terrifies them. They retreat to silence because silence is where they can finally breathe. And when they first pull away, the fear is still in control. The fear is louder than the connection. The fear tells them they need space, distance, quiet, separation. But after some time, hours, days, weeks, the panic starts to fade. Their nervous system settles, their mind becomes quiet again. And when the fear stops shouting, their heart finally has space to speak. That's when the truth surfaces: the connection didn't disappear. The feelings didn't die. The memories didn't fade. In fact, everything they tried to shut down becomes clearer than before. They think about your laugh longer than they expected. They replay a conversation you had that made them feel understood. They remember your calmness. They miss the way they felt around you. They notice the emptiness in their day. They feel a pull they don't want to admit. And inside that pull is the first crack in their avoidance. This is the quiet shift that transforms everything. Their fear begins to lose its grip. Their feelings begin to breathe. And suddenly, they feel something they've been avoiding their entire life: longing. Avoidants do not feel longing while being chased. They feel longing when the chasing stops. Avoidants do not feel connection in pressure. They feel connection in peace. Avoidants do not feel clarity while overwhelmed. They feel clarity in the space that follows. So when they finally decide to reach out, it's not impulsive, it's not random. It's the outcome of internal war. A war where every part of them that was trying to escape has finally grown tired of running. A war where fear, for once, wasn't strong enough to bury the truth. A war where they finally had to admit to themselves that they care, they miss, they want, even if they don't know how to say it in perfect emotional language. Their message is not casual, it is surrender, a subtle, shaky surrender. The first step toward vulnerability they aren't ready to speak out loud. Avoidants often come back quietly. How have you been? A random meme, a soft entry, but beneath that softness is everything they cannot articulate. I've been thinking about you. I calmed down. I'm not running right now. My fear isn't louder than my desire anymore. I feel safer coming toward you than staying away. I realized the distance didn't make me forget. It made me feel. Their fear didn't disappear. It never does completely. But for the first time, it didn't win. Their message means, I'm here, not because you pulled me, but because something inside me pulled me back. It means they took the first step out of their own emotional prison. It means the connection survived their avoidance. It means you mattered in a way they couldn't ignore. Even when silence made it easier to pretend, their fear didn't open the door. Their feelings did. When you finally step back from an avoidant, when your energy softens and the pressure disappears, something profound begins to shift inside them. Something they never expected and could never feel while you were trying to hold the connection together. Avoidants don't experience love and fear at the same time. Their nervous system can only process one at a time, and fear always comes first. That fear is loud, consuming, overwhelming, and blinding. It blocks out everything: affection, appreciation, connection, comfort. The love you offered couldn't land because the fear inside them was too loud to let it in. So long as you were reaching toward them, their instinct was to pull away. But the moment you stepped back, the fear finally had room to settle. And this is where everything changes. When you stop reaching out, their nervous system stops interpreting you as a threat. Not because you were won, but because closeness activates the part of them wired to expect loss, rejection, disappointment, or emotional suffocation. When you were present, their mind thought, I'm losing control. But when you stepped back, their mind finally exhaled. Their chest loosened. Their fear softened. The emotional alarms inside them stopped blaring. And when fear quiets, feelings finally have space to speak. This is why avoidants can only process their emotions in distance. Their internal chaos needs silence before clarity can appear. Your absence becomes the emotional environment where they can finally feel again. Where they can think without panic. Where they can look back without distortion. Where they can reflect without being flooded. Suddenly, the things you did, the kindness, the stability, the way you listened, the way you stayed calm, the warmth you brought, all the things they took for granted when fear was running the show, begin to come into focus. They remember the comfort of your presence. They remember the way you made them feel understood. They remember the peace they felt around you. They remember the grounding energy you offered. And for the first time, it doesn't feel overwhelming anymore. It feels soothing. It feels calming. It feels safe. This is the paradox of the avoidant heart. They feel safe as wanting you only when you're not reaching for them. Your distance doesn't make them stop caring. It makes them finally able to care. Because now, with the pressure removed, their system can finally experience desire without panic. Missing you becomes possible. Wanting you becomes possible. Recognizing your value becomes possible. They can see you through a clear emotional lens, not one fogged up by fear or survival instincts. And that clarity reveals something powerful inside them. Not just that they miss you, but why they miss you. They don't miss the validation, they miss the connection. They don't miss the attention, they miss the emotional safety. They don't miss the comfort of your presence, they miss the meaning of it. They don't miss the routine of talking to you, they miss the way your presence regulated them. And this is the emotional shift avoidants never see coming. Your silence activates the feelings their fear once suppressed. Your distance awakens the attachment they couldn't feel when you were close. Your absence becomes the key that unlocks the love they were running from. They begin to crave what once overwhelmed them. They begin to desire the closeness they once avoided. They begin to want the connection they once misinterpreted as pressure. They begin to feel the emotional pull they fought so hard to ignore. Your distance does not create resentment, it creates realization. And that realization is simple but profound. They finally feel safe enough to feel everything they couldn't feel when you were trying. It isn't that your closeness was wrong. It's that their fear was too loud to let your love in. But once that fear quiets, their heart begins to speak. And what it speaks is the truth they care more deeply than they ever allowed themselves to show. When your silence stops feeling like emotional pressure and starts feeling like emotional distance, the avoidant begins to experience something they never expected: the weight of their own choices. At first, they interpret your silence as peace. It feels like the relief they've been craving. No expectations, no emotional intensity, no vulnerability required. They can finally breathe. They mistake this calm for freedom. They think this quiet is what they wanted. They tell themselves, good, now everything is back in control. But time has a way of revealing what the mind tries to deny. And the same silence that once soothed them begins to shift. It grows heavier, sharper, colder. What once felt like safety now starts to feel like loss. And the avoidant realizes something they never considered. While you were trying to stay close, your silence isn't emotional confusion anymore. It's emotional clarity. It's you stepping out of the role they kept dragging you into. It's you choosing yourself instead of the dynamic. And that shift is what collapses their sense of control. Avoidants are used to silence that waits, silence that aches, silence that hopes, silence that still orbits around them emotionally. They assume your absence still belongs to them. They assume you're still thinking about them, still trying to figure them out, still emotionally there, even when physically distant. But the moment you stop giving your emotional energy, the moment your silence becomes still instead of strained, the avoidant feels it in a way that destabilizes them inside. Your silence becomes unfamiliar. It doesn't reach for them. It doesn't chase them. It doesn't soften for them. It doesn't hover around them. It becomes a boundary instead of a wound. And avoidants do not know what to do with boundaries, especially emotional ones that aren't built from anger or hurt but from self-respect. This kind of silence forces them to face something they have avoided all their life: accountability. With your distance, the emotional noise finally clears, and for the first time they can see themselves. They see the inconsistency. They see the withdrawal. They see the patterns they once justified. They see how they shut down instead of showing up, and they see, painfully, that you were not the one breaking the connection. They were. This realization is not loud at first. It creeps in slowly, during quiet evenings, during long mornings, during moments when their distractions aren't enough. They notice your voice missing from their day. They notice the absence of your emotional warmth. They notice they miss the grounding energy you naturally gave them. They notice that the silence doesn't feel peaceful anymore. It feels empty. And that emptiness doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like consequence. This is the mirror effect. The moment your absence reflects back to them everything they refused to see when you were present. They see that the stability in the relationship came from you. They see that the communication came from you. They see that the emotional maturity came from you. They see that the effort came from you. They see that the safety came from you. And they also see that the walls, the distance, the shutdowns, the inconsistencies came from them. For the first time, they feel the imbalance they claimed didn't exist. And this awareness shakes them, because avoidants are not used to being emotionally confronted without confrontation. They are used to running from chaos, but your silence isn't chaos. It's clarity. It doesn't chase them, yet it doesn't hate them. It doesn't demand anything, yet it demands change. Your silence becomes the thing they can't hide from, because it doesn't pressure them, it reflects them. It shows them the difference between losing emotional control and losing an emotional connection. It shows them that you aren't waiting in the background anymore. It shows them that the distance they asked for became the distance they regret. And that regret is the catalyst. Not your words, not your tears, not your explanations, not your trying, but your shift. Because nothing changes an avoidant faster than the moment they realize your silence no longer belongs to them. It belongs to you. Avoidants never recognize your value while you are still giving, still reaching, still trying to hold the connection together. As long as you remain emotionally available, they stay emotionally overwhelmed. As long as you offer closeness, they stay in defensive mode. As long as you remain present, they cannot feel the absence that would reveal what your presence truly meant. This is why avoidants only realize who you were and what you brought after they get the space they kept insisting they needed. That space doesn't make them forget you. It makes them finally see you clearly. When an avoidant gets space, the first thing that disappears is the pressure, the emotional noise, the overwhelming feeling of closeness that triggers their fear. Without your presence pushing them closer than they know how to handle, their survival instincts calm down. And in that calm, something they've been running from begins to surface: awareness. They no longer feel the need to protect themselves from intimacy, so instead they begin to reflect on the intimacy they lost. At first, they tell themselves they're fine. Avoidants always do. They convince themselves they needed this. They convince themselves distance is good. They reassure themselves that this quiet is peace, not emptiness. But once the initial relief settles, once the adrenaline of escape fades, the truth begins to seep in slowly. They start noticing how different their emotional world feels without you in it. They notice their days feel flatter without your energy. They notice conversations feel colder without your warmth. They notice their routine feels emptier without your presence woven through it. They notice the comfort they took for granted is missing, and nothing else replaces it. Avoidants don't recognize your value through pressure. They recognize it through absence. Your consistency, which they once felt burdened by, becomes something they miss. Your emotional clarity, which once overwhelmed them, becomes something they crave. Your understanding, which they once dismissed, becomes something rare they can't find elsewhere. They begin comparing. And avoidants are not conscious comparers. They don't do it intentionally. It happens subtly, internally, without their permission. They interact with other people, but no one feels like you. No one listens like you. No one moves with the same emotional intelligence. No one feels as grounding, safe, or calming. And the difference between you and everyone else starts growing louder in their mind. This is when the realization hits: the space they asked for didn't bring them happiness, freedom, or clarity. It brought them perspective. It showed them who you actually were, now that they're not blinded by fear. It showed them how much emotional strength you carried. It showed them how much effort you invested quietly, without demanding anything in return. It showed them that the connection didn't suffocate them. Their own wounds did. With distance, avoidants finally see what they ran from. Your love wasn't dangerous. It was healing. Your presence wasn't overwhelming. It was stabilizing. Your patience wasn't weakness. It was emotional maturity. Your compassion wasn't naivete. It was rare. They realized the connection felt too much, because they weren't used to being cared for at that level. They realized they didn't need space from you. They needed space from their own unhealed triggers. They realized you weren't asking for too much. They were giving too little. And perhaps the deepest realization of all: the distance they demanded is the same distance that reveals what they never admitted. Losing you hurts more than the intimacy they feared. Avoidants have to be away from you to see you. They need the space to feel the truth of what they once pushed away. They need the quiet to hear the echo of your absence. They need the stillness to understand the difference between emotional overwhelm and emotional loss. Your presence couldn't teach them this. Your effort couldn't teach them this. Your explanations couldn't teach them this. Your trying couldn't teach them this. Only space could. Because in that space, they finally discover the truth. They didn't need a distance from you. They needed distance to realize what you truly were. There comes a moment in the avoidance emotional journey when everything inside them shifts. Not because you pushed, not because you pleaded, not because you tried harder, but because you finally stopped. You stepped back. You pulled your energy away. You stopped doing the emotional labor for the relationship. And in that moment, something they never expected begins to unfold. What they once interpreted as pressure now transforms into freedom. What they once misread as neediness now transforms into respect. What they once ran from now becomes the very thing they start gravitating toward. And they don't understand it at first. Avoidants rarely do. But slowly, painfully, and quietly, they come to a realization they cannot ignore. The only reason they can approach you now is because you stopped approaching them. Avoidants don't change because someone demands change. They change because something inside them becomes undeniable. When you let go, you stop feeding the dynamic their fear depended on. You stop being the one who chases, fixes, explains, reassures, and holds everything together. And without all of that emotional noise, the avoidant finally feels something they couldn't feel when you were doing all the work. Responsibility. They feel the weight of their silence. They feel the consequences of their distance. They feel the loss of your presence. And that loss forces them into a level of self-reflection they never reach while you're still trying to save the connection. Your letting go becomes the mirror they can't avoid. It reflects back the truth they tried to outrun, that it wasn't you making things intense, it was their fear. It wasn't you overwhelming them, it was their lack of emotional tools. It wasn't your closeness suffocating them, it was their wounds suffocating the connection. And once they see this clearly, they start shifting from defense to awareness, from running to noticing, from avoiding to feeling. And those feelings are complicated for them. They aren't used to wanting someone who isn't pulling at them. They aren't used to desiring someone who isn't chasing them. They aren't used to approaching someone who holds boundaries without anger. They aren't used to recognizing that the love they feared is the love they now crave. But when your energy changes, their experience of you changes. And when their experience of you changes, their behavior changes. Avoidants only step forward when the environment feels emotionally safe, not empty, not cold, safe. And your letting go creates that safety, not because you walked away emotionally, but because you stopped suffocating yourself to keep them comfortable. You shifted from seeking connection to offering stability. You shifted from holding on to holding space. You shifted from reacting to responding. And these shifts tell the avoidant something critical. You are no longer a source of pressure. You are a source of peace. You are no longer someone who needs from them. You are someone who chooses them. And avoidants can only approach people they feel chosen by, not consumed by. The moment they sense you're no longer emotionally dependent on them, their fear softens, their panic melts, their walls loosen. Because the danger wasn't you. It was the idea of being responsible for your emotions. Once that pressure disappears, the connection feels safer. Your presence feels warmer. Your silence feels respectful rather than resentful. And for the first time, they feel something deeply unfamiliar, the desire to move toward you on their own terms. They return not because you chased, but because you stopped chasing. They open up not because you demanded it, but because you stopped forcing the moment. They show interest not because you waited, but because you let go without punishing them. They grow not because you begged, but because your absence forced them to meet themselves. This is the twist avoidants never expect. Your letting go is the moment they stop running. Your emotional independence is the moment their fear loses its power. Your self-respect is the moment their heart wakes up. When you let go, you don't lose the connection, you reset it. You don't push them away. You remove the reason they kept running. You don't end the story. You finally allow it to unfold in a healthier way. And without realizing it, your letting go becomes the first safe moment of the entire relationship. The moment they can finally come back, not out of fear, not out of guilt, not out of habit, but out of choice.